Welcome to Legal Nurse Podcast. This is your spot to get inspiration, tips, stories, and guidance to help you in your legal nurse consulting practice. I'm Pat Iyer, the host of Legal Nurse Podcast since 2016. We are among the top 5% of all podcasts in the world in terms of longevity and sharing information consistently week after week with legal nurse consultants. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome to Legal Nurse Podcast. I am Pat Iyer and the host of your show. Our show is focused on bringing to you people who can add value to your life as a legal nurse consultant. And I have with me a guest today who is a very experienced legal nurse consultant based in Florida, and she is the owner of Palivoda Legal Nurse Consultants. She is also on the board of directors of the American Association of Legal Nurse Consultants and is, as a board of directors member, heavily involved in assisting people in chapters in various parts of the country. She has also been in a leadership position in the Orlando American Association of Legal Nurse Consultants chapter, which is one of the virtual chapters in our country, which invite people in, regardless of where they live. They can be a member of the virtual chapter and participate in the virtual education and activities. My guest today is Tory Palivoda. Tory, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Pat. Thank you for having me.
I know that if I can take you back in the time machine to when you first discovered the field of legal nurse consulting, tell us about where you were in your life at that time.
Well, when I first learned about legal nurse consulting, I was director of nursing at a skilled nursing facility in Ohio. And we had a corporate nurse that had visited the facility, and she was also a legal nurse consultant. And we were sitting at a table reviewing records of potential litigation or family complaint charts, things like that. That was her job, is to review charts prior to any litigation. And I would help her with that. And one day she said, you've really got a good eye for reviewing records. You should look into legal nurse consulting. And that's when I looked at her and said, what's a legal nurse consultant? And so that's kind of the first opening that I had about learning about legal nurse consulting.
And in a way, you were doing that in a, maybe not an official risk management title, but in a risk management role of determining what happened.
That is true. It is true. A lot of people don't realize in some of the roles when they're a risk manager, quality assurance type thing, that's what you're doing, is reviewing records and determining whether there was something missed that should have been done or something done that wasn't done type thing. So yeah, it definitely is something that we do a lot of time in our different roles.
You bring me back to the last job that I had in which I got a paycheck, which was in 1987. I was a quality assurance nurse. And I remember that I decided to do a study of falls in the hospital. The hospital had two buildings, one a small community hospital and one a bigger hospital. And I went through and I found a patient who fell 17 times in one admission. That number sticks in my brain after all of these years. And I remember pulling the records to try to figure out what she was doing. And it turned out she was a young girl with a psychiatric issue, and she would fall rather dramatically so that she could get attention. And I created a report, summarized it, and then gave it to the man who was our risk manager, was an attorney. And he looked at me and he said, "Who asked you to do this? This is really good." And I said, well, it popped out at me as I was reviewing incident reports. I kept seeing her name over and over. So I wanted to figure out what happened. When I then went to a conference a few months later on career alternatives for nurses, I found out about legal nurse consulting. And I came back and spoke to that same person. And I said, how do I find attorneys? This sounds really interesting to be an expert witness. And he took me through the process of, at that time, going to the county seat with Martindale Hubble, which were books that were in the library, and said, here's how you find attorneys. Here's how you get their names and addresses. And then there's a publication in your state that describes cases. So you look to see who's handling medical malpractice cases, and then you look up their information. And then you write them a letter, which I did. And that's how I started getting work.
Well, that's really interesting because, again, everybody's journey to finding LNC is totally different. Some, found it through a work colleague, some found it in that way. So everybody's journey is a little different. So it's interesting to hear the different stories.
So you got this information from the corporate nurse. She told you about legal nurse consulting. What was your next step after that?
Well, I immediately I didn't do anything for about a year. Truthfully, I just continued to do my job, and then it kind of creeped up again. And I thought, let me look into this. So I went to Google at that time, and Google popped up a legal nurse consulting course that I immediately signed up. I didn't really even do any investigation. I just signed up for the course, paid the money, did the course online. And then kind of what happened with a lot of people that I talked to, nothing happened. I didn't really do anything for about a year because I was still working my clinical job and didn't pursue what I needed to do to make it into a business. So another year passed, and now it's almost the beginning of 2018. And I thought, okay, let's try and do this again. Let's see what I need to do. So I went back to Google. Google directed me at that time to AALNC. I had never heard of AALNC. It popped up. I found that they had local chapters in Florida. So I went to both of the meetings, and these were live meetings because it was before COVID. And that's kind of where the ball started rolling from there, is with AALNC connecting, getting the education I needed, and started from there. So that's kind of what I did after I got the little inkling of it from the one nurse course, found AALNC, and that's kind of where I started.
How did you get that first case?
Oh, that was actually from the course I took, the directory. They had a directory. After you finish the course, they put your name in a directory, and a nurse contacted me from California. She was a subcontract. Had subcontractors, and she knew I did nursing home cases. So she contacted me to ask if I wanted a subcontract. Of course, I said yes, because that was my first opportunity. And it was really a pretty good experience because she was a mentor as well as a subcontractor for me. She helped me learn the ropes. There was times when I thought she was very hard. She was very critical sometimes of my work and my grammar and my, all those things that you don't catch the first time you're reading something or when you're brand new. But it was so helpful because it really molded the importance of how reports need to be stellar. Reports need to be perfect. They need to be without error before you turn them in. And I just remember her talking about when she was reviewing my narratives, and she would say, Tory, you're talking like a nurse. You're charting. You're talking like you're charting. You need to put in all the appropriate grammar and filler words. So that took a little bit of a lesson and to learn how to truly write.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first case. My first case was subcontracting. And then pretty much all my cases after that and all my work has just been through referrals. I mean, it literally has been referrals and networking that I've gotten a lot of other additional cases.
Uh-huh. Tell us a little bit more about that process of referrals and networking, how that worked for you.
I could talk an hour on that, but I don't think we have an hour. But networking to me is the key. It really is the key to being successful. I mean, it takes time. It takes effort to connect to more people. Whether it's through LinkedIn or whether it's through Zoom calls, whether it's AALNC, whether it's your different programs. I mean, there's all kinds of different programs out there that people need to take advantage of and listen and learn and connect and make your database even larger. Just this last week, I had 2 nurses reach out to me who aren't long-term care nurses, but they came across a case that was long-term care and they had some questions. So they just reached out to me. We answered it and we move, so having that database of nurses that you can reach to is very helpful. Now, I can honestly say that most of my subcontracting work has been through networking, whether it was meeting somebody at the forum, the conventions, or different Zoom calls that they've had in education. And I wrote down people's names and I reach out to them by an email after the event and say, hey, I saw you on the call last night. It was nice to meet you. And that leads to another conversation. And then 2 months later, they call with a case. So I just think networking is so important because it's been very, very, very important in my career.
And then you've talked about networking with legal nurse consultants. Tell us about how you do that if you are in a meeting with attorneys.
Yes, well, that is another way. So with I think of networking with attorneys, or excuse me, networking with LNCs, but with attorneys, my experience has been the referrals. So my first expert witness case was they got my name. I'm not even sure, to be truthful, how they got my name to start with. But this attorney called me and we discussed the case. I explained that I'm brand new. He was very open to having a brand new expert witness, on the case. And he was very comfortable in guiding me through the non-clinical part, the deposition prep and all that stuff. So I had that first case with him. It went very well. I still do expert witness cases for him 8 years later. Now, he has probably referred me to 4 or 5 different attorneys. So it's just that one attorney turned into 5 other attorneys that I work for, just because of that. And one time I was at an arbitration and the arbitrator the next day gave my name to a different attorney and said, hey, call this. She's really good. And so the attorney called me and I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I must have done all right. So you never know where the referral is going to come from. But referral attorneys, if you do a very good job for them, they're going to refer you. They're not going to refer somebody who doesn't do a good job. I mean, that's all you can say. I mean, that's their credibility. So referral attorneys are very, very important.
I'm thinking about a man who, similar to what you're describing in Atlantic City, who gave my name out very frequently. We had a little set of gifts that we gave people who made referrals. So we put in the mail immediately after they had given a name to a colleague, given our name to the colleague, and that colleague would call and say, I'm looking for a nursing expert. And I hand wrote out a note and put this little package in the mail. We had them grouped into 4 categories. They were essentially things that were left over from exhibiting, to be truthful. Pens and pads and, little magnifying glasses and those kinds of things, sorted into 4 groups. Well, we got to the point where we had given him everything. There was nothing left to give. He had gone through the 4 different packages. So then I started sending nothing, but I gave him handwritten notes, which accompanied the other 4 packages as well. Didn't make a difference. He kept on referring and referring and referring. And when I sold the company, he was disappointed because he wanted to keep on giving me work. And I had a non-compete agreement that I couldn't take cases within a 500-mile radius of New Jersey. And he said, oh, that's terrible. What am I going to do now? You can give the cases to the new owner. That's the point of the non-compete. I don't know if he did. It is wonderful when you have somebody who's an enthusiastic champion for you, like you've had, Tory, because that automatically reduces the barrier to entry makes the person who's gotten your name much more willing to give you a try because Tom recommended you or Suzanne recommended you.
Mhm. And another incident that happened is I had contact with an attorney at one point, and he didn't have anything at that point. So it was one of those, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't really keep up with him like you did. I didn't send him frequent letters, which I should have at that point, but he kind of fell off my radar. And about probably 2 years later, he reached out to me to do some merit reviews. And again, now I've been doing merit reviews for him for probably 3 or 4 years consistently. So you never know when that person's going to pop back into the radar as well. So again, I
Yes.
think it is important what you said, the follow-up and to just keep in touch with people, because sometimes you might not be on their radar today, but a year from now they might think back and, oh, I remember somebody from Florida that might be a good fit for this case, and then they'll call you.
As we've been talking, you've mentioned the role of being a subcontractor. You've mentioned being an expert witness. Are you primarily in one role versus another at this point in your career?
Well, in my career, I've really done several things, even though there's so many different LNC roles that I've not even dabbled in, but there's a few that I have. I've done quite a bit of subcontracting, which I enjoy. And then I've also had my own clients, as I've discussed. I do record reviews, I do merit reviews, I do affidavit of merits for some of my own clients. And then the expert witness role. I've done some, uh, my mind went blank for just a second, but I do the firm work. So about a year ago, I got approached by an LNC that I'm friends with that worked for this firm remotely. And she said, hey, we need more nurses. Are you interested? And that's something I'd never, ever had on my radar, is to work for in-house for a firm. It's just not something I ever thought I would do. And so I said, well, I'm willing to, meet with them. And so we did a Zoom call with all the attorneys, and 2 days later I had a case, and that was a year ago. So I work contract for them. I'm not an in-house employee, but I'm a contract employee, and I work about 20 hours a week for them. And it's been a great partnership. They're very appreciative, I should say, of the work you do. And it's just been great. It's a defense firm. So a majority of my subcontracting and the firm work has been defense. That's just kind of the way it happened. It wasn't that I was looking specifically for defense. It just kind of happened that way. Now my expert witness work has been both plaintiff and defense. So, it kind of, I did some product liability along the way, but just a short-lived period on that as well. So I've done a little bit of a few things.
And are you maintaining any kind of a clinical role as well?
Yeah, I still am currently at the same nursing home that I was the director of nursing at 13 years ago. So I'm still PRN at that facility, and I work a few shifts a month to maintain my clinical status for my expert witness work.
I just had a conversation with a legal nurse consultant a couple days ago about her desire to continue to do expert work, but there had been some changes in the staffing in the hospital where she works. She's a critical care nurse, and she wanted to work.
Legal Nurse Consulting Success. Build your business and confidence with strategy and results is a 2-volume set. Volume 1 isn't just about wishful thinking. It's about results, whether you're looking for part-time work, a full-time business, or a career shift that honors your nursing background. This book lays the foundation. Written by experienced LNCs who understand the unique challenges of transitioning from bedside to business, this book provides a clear, encouraging, and practical guide to launching and growing a legal nurse consulting career. Whether you're brand new to this field or you've dipped your toe in and feel overwhelmed, Legal Nurse Consulting Success. Build your business with confidence Strategy, and Results, Volume 1. Meets you where you are and helps you move forward. The second volume, Legal Nurse Consulting Success, Build Your Business with Confidence, Strategy, and Results, Volume 2, offers practical guidance for LNCs who are ready to expand their skills, strengthen their client relationships, and operate with professionalism. Through real-world strategies, the co-authors, myself and Sylvia Anenye, address marketing with clarity, closing sales confidently, managing difficult attorneys, subcontracting wisely, succeeding as expert witnesses, and building business systems that support long-term growth. This book helps you approach your business with focus, resilience, and the tools needed to deliver consistent value to attorney clients. Get your copy, either digital or paperback, at the link lnc.tips/creating series. That's lnc.tips/creating series.
1 day a week, and they told her that they didn't have the budget for that. And we talked about the fact that she could get a job in another facility, and that to be an expert, she didn't have to work full time or even necessarily 1 day a week. It could be 1 or 2 shifts a month. It would be enough to maintain clinical involvement, but not be too demanding given other things that were going on in her life. I did that as well for many years as a med-surg expert, working 1 or 2 shifts a month. And it helped when I got asked that question, when was the last time you took care of a patient?
Yeah.
And I could tell them when was the last time I worked.
Correct.
I know that various states, and I don't know if you have run into this or and obviously you're thinking about it, but various states have different requirements. You have to have 5 years of experience, or you have to have worked within 5 years of the incident, or within 1 year of the incident, or 2 years of the incident.
Yes.
And so I'm assuming that when you get asked those questions, it helps you as well in answering.
Yes. And again, I get that question asked by other LNCs sometimes, and I'll say, every state is different. You really have to look at what the state requirement is. But when I'm approached by an attorney for an expert witness case, I am very upfront with telling him what my clinical experience is and what my current clinical experience is, so he knows that I'm working just a couple shifts a month, because some states require you to be like 50% still clinically active. Well, I'm not anywhere close to that. So, I leave it up to the attorney to decide whether my current clinical status meets the needs of what he needs for that state. So that's kind of how I approach it. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because the attorney is responsible for knowing whether that person they're considering hiring is going to meet the qualifications for the state.
Yeah.
I tell my coaching clients that there is overall in the legal system, there's a much closer scrutiny of the qualifications of experts than there used to be. I've been in the field for 35 years. It used to be that anybody, including physicians, could say, oh, I can talk about nursing standards. No problem. I supervise them. I know what they're supposed to do. Down to a nurse who works in a nursing home in a specific state. Is that person going to be qualified to be an expert in a different nursing home case in a different state?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. I haven't come across specific state type things like that as far as nursing, because I've done many expert witness cases out of the state of Florida.
I had an attorney. There are times that you really enjoy educating attorneys. There's also times that you like to prove that you were right. That nice little feeling. And this attorney came to me and said, I need an expert on an emergency room case. I'm defending a nurse practitioner. She worked in the emergency department. And I said, I can get you an emergency department nurse practitioner. He says, no, I think a physician would be fine. I don't need a nurse practitioner. So he got a physician, came back to me 2 months later and said, the judge said that my doctor was not qualified to comment on the nurse practitioner's standard of care. You still have that nurse practitioner expert available for me? Be happy to help you with that. No problem.
Yeah, that is always fun when you have that little, they come back kind of with their head down and ask for help.
And of course, you want to say, no, 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 no. But you're, of course, gracious because, we all have misunderstandings. We all do things that we are absolutely convinced are correct.
Mhm.
And then it blows up in our face.
And it's funny you mentioned about educating the attorney. I had a call with a nurse the other day who was talking about, when you speak with attorneys, are they usually pretty knowledgeable about the case and the clinical part? And I said, mine are all over the board. Most of them are very knowledgeable. They know the medical, they know the nursing home regs as well as I do for the most part. And so they can talk the talk. They understand when I'm talking with them. But then I've had some where it's like hand feeding them the information. So you're having to really, really educate them on what it is to care for a nursing home resident and what the regulations are. What are the standard of care? Why did they not meet that standard of care? What was the deviation? And then, explaining to them, this is what they did, but this is what they should have done. So you have to really do a lot of education with attorneys. Some are very knowledgeable, and but others, that's what we're here for, is to help educate them.
And the realities are, Tory, that it could be their first or second or third nursing home case. They may go into a nursing home case thinking it's like a hospital case. The records are going to be the same. After all, got nurses who are working in both places. So you're going to, of course, encounter the same documentation. And they get very quickly dependent upon a knowledgeable expert such as yourself who can say, there are regulations that are different. There are MDSs and MARs and TARs, which is medication administration records and treatment administration records, and they're different than in the hospital. And they learn sometimes the hard way, and sometimes because somebody like you has tucked them under the wing and said, all right, now listen, I'll help you learn how to litigate a nursing home case.
Yes, very much so. Yep, I agree. And that was the case with this one attorney. It was nursing home cases were new to him. And he knew that, and he was very open to listening and to learning, and to, he wasn't, difficult to teach. Let's put it that way. So it was a very, very good relationship.
Wonderful. Has your business, since you began doing legal nurse consultant, been a steady flow, or have there been hills and valleys in terms of your caseload?
Yes, there has been some lulls, that's for sure. How I kind of started out is once I got in with AALNC, got my first subcontracting case that I talked about. I did my day job, as I say, for about a year and a half, along with legal nurse consulting. So that year and a half was packed full of working full time and doing legal nurse on the side. And it took about a year and a half until I felt very comfortable having enough clients and enough work to leave the bedside full time. And then I stayed PRN. And so that was September of 2019. And I always think, oh, wow, that was right before COVID. I mean, it was kind of an interesting time to have stepped out. Little did I know a few months later things would change for everything. But I quit my full-time job in September of 19, and I've been doing it full-time since then. Now, there has been lulls, ups and downs in between subcontracting jobs. You do a subcontracting job for a while, and then things change, and they don't have as many cases. And so you've got to figure out, what am I going to do in between? Or with expert witness cases, as you know, it's feast or famine sometimes with those. You'll be really busy with your expert witness case, and then nothing happens with it for a year. So you're kind of just waiting for that call from the attorney that they're setting up depositions or something like that. And so you've got to fill in time. You've got to be ready to understand that there's going to be some lulls. With some of my product liability, that's kind of a short-term based role. I did a little bit of that in between some of the lulls. And then during COVID, things were a little bit slower because a lot of the court systems were kind of shut down, things like that. So I took more time then, and I studied for my LNCC exam, and I took that exam during that kind of downtime. And then any other time that I think I've had a lull, I reach out to other LNCs and say, hey, I'm open. Anybody have anything? And it's really been very welcoming. I've always gotten somebody referring me to something, and it's worked out. So I haven't had much downtime. Let's put it that way. The other thing that I've kind of done, I think, whenever I have downtime, I just kind of pour myself more into the volunteer work with AALNC. I just found that even to be more my availability to do more volunteer work and help out and improve the processes at AALNC for the future LNCs. So
Yes.
yeah, there's plenty to do if there is that lull, but you do have to expect that there is going to be times when you're going to have a lull. I remember one time, I didn't have a deposition for like 6 months, and then I had 2 in the same week. And I thought my head was going to explode at that point because my brain could not hold another word of information. So I don't recommend that. I don't recommend 2 depositions in the same week. It's a little bit of a challenge.
It is, because you have to keep all of that in your head. You make me think about a time when I had 2 trials back to back, and the attorney who was cross-examining me knew that my schedule had to be juggled around so that I could be available for their trial. And I had gone, I think, a couple of years without any trials, and then bang, 2 of them right together. And he used the fact that I wasn't available initially in the cross-examination to imply that all I was doing was going from trial to trial to trial, and I was a professional expert. It was very clever because it was totally wrong. But the way that he posed the question was, he was able to get in his insinuation that I was a professional expert and that I had, isn't it true, Nurse Iyer, you weren't available at the beginning of this trial because you were in another trial. And I couldn't sneak in, but it was my first trial in 2 years. But, I lost that opportunity. But, it's the kind of thing that attorneys are trained to do, is to take a fact and just twist it just a little bit to meet their needs.
It is amazing the word, how they can word things to totally, it's amazes me. It really does amaze me. When I sit in depositions and I hear the question and I do what they say to do, pause. You pause and you listen to the question, you think before you answer. And I think, wow, that's a really interesting way of putting it. However, this is my answer, So it's amazing what they learn, I'm sure, in law school of how to word things, It's very interesting.
My last question, next to my last question, is what advice would you give a legal nurse consultant who's starting out today?
Well, I would say there's 3 things that come to mind that I think of whenever I try and talk with somebody who's really looking into being a new LNC. One is the networking, which we've talked about, how important the networking is in order to stay in contact, get those referrals, get that first case. I'm confident, not confident, but I am very, I feel very strongly that a lot of LNCs will get their first case from another LNC, not necessarily an attorney, eventually it'll be an attorney, but their first referral will come from another LNC. So connecting and staying active in the LNC community. Second thing I would think of would be, and we didn't really talk about this much, but the business side of being an LNC. that was a struggle. I mean, so I would definitely make sure to let them know that in nursing school, we aren't taught business. Okay. So you are going to have to learn that, teach yourself, read, reach out to people, and learn how to run a business, or you're going to get things mixed up and things are going to get missed, and it's going to be very time consuming and challenging. So I think the business side, focusing on that, is also something that they need to know up front. The third thing is just communication, and not necessarily communication with in writing reports. Yes, I've talked about that. That needs to be stellar. It needs to be perfect. But also your communication with in written, in emails, in phone calls. You need to be prepared for all of that. When you have a phone call, you need to make sure that you prepared, you have everything in front of you that you need to have that conversation with the attorney and be able to speak knowledgeable about the situation. And then your communication as far as emails. If somebody emails you, it's best to respond quickly, promptly. That shows your intention and your effort. So I just think all kinds of communications are very important as well. And being patient.
I hope that everyone heard that last point, Tory, because I have seen people lose jobs because they took 2-3 days to respond, and by the time they responded, the case had gone to somebody else.
And what's funny about that, though, is on our end, we need to respond timely. Again, you'll lose that case. They're going to move on. I completely agree with that. But then I've had nurses say, this attorney hasn't gotten back to me. It's been a week. What should I do? Just be patient. I always tell them, be patient. They're very busy. Your case is not the only one on their desk, So having them learn how to be patient and communicate, because they're like, I don't want to be like I'm pushy, but I said, you can still communicate, send that email, just checking in type email. That doesn't hurt, because sometimes things get pushed off the radar, but also you need to be very timely with your communication, but don't always expect it to be, right on for them, because they're very busy.
Yes. And speaking of communication, I know that people watching this on our YouTube channel or listening on the audio channels may want to get in touch with you. What would be the best way for them to reach you?
My email is tory@palivodalegalnurse.com. So that's probably the easiest way. TORY@Palivoda, PALIVODA, legal nurse. Or LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm very active there. So you can always message me on LinkedIn and I'll respond.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tory. It's been a pleasure talking with you, rejuvenating some memories of things that are stuck in my very overcrowded brain, and hearing about how you have been able to build your business. Also, in a time when COVID slowed things down significantly, you came into the field right before that, and in spite of that, have been very successful in bringing attention, bringing cases to you. So hats off to you for being able to accomplish that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time, Pat, and I love listening to your podcast. So it's been an honor to be a member of your podcast team.
Thank you. And for the people who are listening, who are part of our world, thank you for being here, for staying and listening to Tory. I hope you've gotten some nuggets from what she said, some inspiration, and seeing her as an example of somebody who has been successful in building a business as an independent LNC from the ground up. You can go to legalnursebusiness.com. If you haven't been to our revised website, we have it organized now so that if you have specific questions like how do I get started, or how do I improve my report writing skills, or what do I need to know about exhibiting, there's a series of questions that direct you to resources that give you those answers. Please go to legalnursebusiness.com. And hang on just another couple minutes to find out who's coming up next on Legal Nurse Podcast. I'll see you again soon. In this episode, we explored how legal nurse consultants can confidently market their services
and attract the right attorney clients. We started with the importance of defining your ideal client, whether plaintiff or defense, large firm or small, and sharpening your focus so that your marketing energy isn't wasted. Next, we looked at how to address attorney pain points directly. Attorneys hire you to solve problems, not just to review medical records. By framing your services in terms of their fears and frustrations, like being blindsided by medical details, spending too much time on records, or hiring ineffective experts, you show them the value you bring. Finally, we covered the power of referrals and how to build a steady stream of them using the TRACK method. Tell, remind, audience, contact, and keep. This structured approach makes it easier for attorneys and colleagues to introduce you to new prospects and strengthens your credibility in the legal community. Together, these three strategies, clarity, tailored messaging, and referral building, give you a foundation for growing a thriving LNC business. Coming up next on Legal Nurse Podcast. I'm Pat Iyer, your host. Join me.
Thank you for being part of the Legal Nurse Podcast audience. I'm delighted that you've joined us for this episode. Be sure to go to legalnursebusiness.com and get your free reports, look around the website, pick up some tools that will be useful for you in your legal nurse consulting practice. And be sure to join us for the next episode.